the headquarters dissolved as soon as we basically told people you're allowed to leave, they left. It's like we opened the jail doors and everybody bailed. And it was an amazing thing to see, because as the CEO of a company, you start thinking, wow, was I trapping these people here by telling them that this is where the headquarters is? And it was a little bit of a, crazy thing. But I looked at Jackie, my wife, and I said, if we're going to be doing something here, we've been talking about leaving the Bay Area for a while. Now's a great time. And if you want to talk about why leave the Bay Area, I mean, there's the obvious stuff of, traffic and the fires, and but it's actually, for at least for us, it was personally, um, I didn't like the way the culture was going. I didn't like the fact that the Bay Area had turned to be a very, very status driven, very comparative culture, where you go to a restaurant, everyone is thinking about what everyone else's fundraising round looks like, who's winning, who's losing, who's making more money. The kids in schools where our kids were talking about what kind of cars their parents drove. It just turned into, I used to think LA and New York were kind of the status driven, the winners and losers cultures. And I thought the Bay Area was getting worse than those places. And I know a lot of my friends were feeling the same way. And so, there's that. And then the other thing is the governance in California is terrible. Like, I think at this point, it's very obvious. We were one of the first people who left. But at this point, I think you're starting to hear a cacophony of people who are kind of thoughtful, saying that they don't want to deal with it anymore. That, when you've got a legislature that is vilifying people who are creating jobs, when you've got an environment where, I mean, look, we don't manufacture widgets, but if I manufactured anything, there's no way I would be in California. I probably wouldn't have been there 5 years ago, because they make it incredibly difficult for you to operate a business. And I'll tell you a funny story about Berkeley, where we founded our company. But like, I mean, literally Berkeley, when we got to a certain size, I think it was 30 or 40 people, they started sending in, we were working with banks at the time, they started sending in somebody to measure the counter heights every day in our kitchen to make sure that they were, OSHA compliant. And when I finally called the city and I said, why are you doing this? They said, well, we don't like you here. We don't want you here. You serve banks and the government, and those are evil entities. And we don't want a company like that in Berkeley. And California is turning more like Berkeley than it is like normal. And I grew up in Berkeley, by the way. I have a lot of love for Berkeley, but like, that's crazy. And I think California is turning that direction. So, the reality of the situation is you can only talk to the governor enough times where you realize, like, they don't get it. Frankly, they don't want us to be happy. And I want my people to be happy. And I want my family to be happy. So we left. And by the way, I mean, we'd been thinking about this for a while. So we were looking at everywhere. I mean, we went to Nashville, we went to Austin, we went to Denver, we went to Sun Valley, we went to all kinds of fun places to kind of see, could we see ourselves living there? And I think Seattle has a combination of characteristics that was really attractive to us. As you would imagine, I know almost every single CEO in the Bay Area. And we've been having this conversation over glasses of wine or scotch for a long time. What I don't think people understand is we're in the second inning of this. We're not like in the eighth inning of this. There are a lot of companies that are still about to move. And I know exactly how they're thinking about it, because I get a call every couple of days from some CEOs saying, I'm about to make this decision and I want to get your opinion before I make it. Like, the reality is that I can separate myself a little bit in the sense that personally, taxes are not my biggest driving force, but for a lot of people, they are. And the state of Washington has a very attractive tax regime today, and the governor continues to say he wants to change it. And look, like, this whole like billionaires tax thing, whether it happens or it doesn't happen, it's not actually going to fundamentally change my opinion about where I want to live. But a lot of people are going to look at that and say that's a vilification of me. You're targeting me. I don't want to go over there if you're targeting me. The governor of Texas is sitting there ripping up California income tax statements on YouTube and saying this will never happen here. And I think a lot of people look at that and they say, you know what, that sounds pretty attractive. And frankly, if I'm going to be paying 10% taxes, you know where I want to do it is Hawaii. So like, in essence, even if nothing's actually happened, the narrative in Washington today is that they don't want to maintain what Nashville and Austin and Miami and a bunch of other places are saying that they do want to maintain, which is very attractive to business owners. And people can argue about whether it's right or it's wrong. That's somewhat irrelevant. The question is actually, do you want these people moving to your state or not? And
Yeah,
if you're willing to accept the fact that they're not going to move to your state and they're not going to bring those jobs with them, then institute whatever policies you want. But I think the governor needs to understand every time he says capital gains tax, he loses 10 companies. Like when he wakes up and he says it into his pillow, 5 companies don't move. And like this is becoming a huge PR issue for Washington State, even though nothing has substantively changed.
I think it's a great point, and I think maybe people don't appreciate this future of work element. And you had 50% of your people, as soon as you gave them permission to do it, that moved. And now, I think you told me the other day when we were chatting a bit about this, for every one CEO that's taken their company and decided to move somewhere else, there's 10 others that are thinking about it in California. And
Yep.
so we have this both great opportunity as Washington State to attract a lot of those people and their companies, but we're in a competition with others that I think are maybe more welcoming and pro-business, in at least from the government perspective. And it's a really challenging time in that regard, especially in light of the fact that our tax revenues are growing rapidly in Washington State. They were up over 10% the last year. They've grown $4 billion in the last 2 years. And well over doubled, and up 25 plus billion in the last 10 years since we rejected an income tax.
Yep. Look, I'm not here to opine on what we should do as a state. I can just tell you cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
Cause and effect is you keep on telling people you're going to raise taxes, people keep on not. And look, I mean, the reality of the situation is the people who are in Washington State have flexibility they didn't have a year ago. And that's persistent flexibility. It's not just who are we losing who's not coming. It's also who are we losing who's currently here who won't stay. And I think people need to be fully aware that like there are a lot of people who currently call themselves Seattle residents or Washington residents who don't have to be tomorrow. They're basically nation states in their own right. Like they can move wherever they want and it's trivial. And trying to keep people there, which is California's new strategy, is like let's close the doors and force people to stay there. We're going to institute a wealth tax that has a tail. We're going to make it punitive for you to stay, just causes people to leave more.
Well, that's a
These are
good
not the strategy.
So you decided to, I think there's this thing called leaving and cleaving, right? You left California, cleared
Yep.
for a whole bunch of reasons. Why did you kind of cleave and choose to come to Seattle?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think different people, it's kind of there's that Latin expression that you can't argue with taste, but I mean, look, from our standpoint, we like the West Coast. We have a lot of family here. Uh, it's prosaic stuff. Like Jackie's mom has a place in Salt Spring, and so they visit there, and it would be convenient. But it's also you've got a really strong enterprise base, and from a hiring standpoint, from a partnering standpoint, there are a lot of really important companies in the area. It's a beautiful area. I mean, if you look just geographically, it's beautiful. When I started meeting people in Seattle, we have a lot of friends who had already lived in Seattle, and we felt like we found some of our people. Very cerebral, interesting, welcoming. I mean, this whole Seattle freeze thing is complete garbage, by the way. Like, I don't know who invented that concept, but like we didn't feel that at all. And we moved during COVID, which is not an easy time to meet people, and people were incredibly welcoming. I mean, the street I live on, we have some real gems, honestly. And like I felt incredibly, and our family has felt incredibly welcome as we've come. Um, and I feel like it's everybody's got their own rubric by which they make decisions like this. But if I were going to think about what's important to me, it's the type of people that I can join, it's the environment there, and it's geographically, it's convenient for our family. It's consistent with what we wanted. I'm
And
not a huge skier. Some people move to Denver because they love being near mountains. Like, there are mountains in Seattle, but it's not like the most important thing to me. And by the way, I discovered all kinds of super cool things that, like, wake surfing was not in my lexicon before. And uh,
well, Lake
I,
Washington is pretty darn good option for that.
I mean, it's there from a quality of life standpoint. It is a really strong quality.
What do you envision that being for Tanium, and what do you see when you talk to some of those other CEOs about how they're thinking about the future of work?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we're all realizing some flavor of this that's similar, which is there's no way we're cramming people back in an office 5 days a week. Just no way. People don't want to do it.
Mhm.
I don't want to force them to do it. And our productivity in our tech teams is 37% higher than it was before this. So,
Mm.
like, I mean, from the standpoint of just like me being selfish and saying for Tanium's benefit, it's better to give people the flexibility because they're more productive outside of the office than they are inside. And for people, it's way better because they want the flexibility. And so it's a win-win to give it to them. I know CEOs who honestly, and I'm talking about really big companies here who are really established, like 300-year-old banks, who are going to a virtual headquarters on a go-forward basis. I
Mm.
know a lot of companies in tech that are considering going down to a fifth of their real estate that they had before COVID. As a ratio of number of people to square feet, they will go to 1/5 of where they used to be. Um, I think that we're going to end up seeing a situation where it's going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult for people to go back. I don't want to go back. Now, I will say that, when I look at the need for office, people want that ability to come together
Mm.
on a periodic basis. And I think our offices are essentially going to be purposed for people to be able to have meetings that are some combination of feeling like they have camaraderie and that they're part of a group of people that they care about. I think we're going to have a lot more offsites. So whether it's like Tanium kickoff, like the thing that we had right before that went off, I think that we're going to have a lot more regional offsites. But I don't actually think that anyone I know is considering going back to an office 5 days a week. And like, I mean, when I look at San Francisco's downtown core, which I know pretty well, and I haven't spent a lot of time exploring Seattle's yet because it's not a great time to explore anything with lots of people around you. But uh, that just means a wholesale shift in use of space. I mean, there's just no reason to have space the way that we had it before. And I think, Tanium may end up with a third or less of our real estate square footage in 3 years that we have today, which is
Well,
crazy.
it's bringing it back to Seattle and in kind of iconic Seattle companies. I mean, Nordstrom just
Yep.
announced this week that they are dramatically reducing their square footage of their space in downtown Seattle on kind of on the kind of corporate headquarters side, not the store. And if a Nordstrom is already thought so far through that and is making those kinds of changes, to your point, you're going to have banks and insurance companies and health companies and all kinds of companies that are going to be able to do that. And there is this spectrum from kind of physical first, if not almost physical only centralized corporate headquarters to centers of excellence and centers of concentration to all the way to the other end, the GitHubs, which seem to do this very well, that are kind of truly, remote first
Yep.
organizations. And I think we will have, depending upon the nature, the flavor of the business, the culture of the organization, differences there. But every company that I'm involved with, even the earliest companies, are thinking about this now as how does it fit within their culture and their practices.
Well, look, I would just say this. I actually think paradoxically, it's easier for us to do it than we would have had if we had 10 people. And the reason is you're forming your culture when you have
Yes.
10 people.
Mhm.
Tanium's culture is relatively formed. I mean, I've got literally thousands of people at this point that I trust to be able to inculcate somebody else with Tanium's culture.
Mhm.
And I think, if you're just trying to figure out who you are, doing it over Zoom would
Harder.
be a lot harder than, I mean, I think we've got a lot of, kind of the priests of our culture already out there. So we're not forming the religion. We're basically making sure that we're tending the flock at some level. And so I do think though, and I've heard this comment from many CEOs, that today it may feel easier. In 3 years, we may have drawn down on the bank of culture that we essentially established over 13 years.
Yeah.
And how we replenish that bank is going to have to fundamentally change. Now, I will tell you, Tanium had a lot of our employees already virtual. If you look at our sales teams, our support teams, they were already virtualized. And so we already had to be thinking about this. And the way I'm starting to realize I can reallocate this is it's almost like a democratization of the way that we're infusing culture into the company, in the sense that if I can bring the whole company together 6 times a year instead of 1 time a year,
Mm-hmm.
if I can take this 20 or $30 million that I would have been spending on facilities and shift it into events that allow people to get together, what that means is the person who is already remote is going to have way more cultural infusion than they would have had before. Whereas the person who used to be at headquarters may have a little less, but that's arguable. I mean, I think we can do
So
a lot of
it's even
things.
better, that you don't have so much of the concentration of power in the headquarters facility. And so you do have these dynamics around a digital first world where things are really digitized from a process perspective, which of course unlocks a whole bunch of potential around leveraging that data with machine
Mhm,
learning. Then
mhm.
you've got these new kind of cadences, right? Like a weekly, quarterly, monthly business review you're talking about 6 times a year. I think we're going to have these XBRs, X is the time period business reviews, internal,
Yep.
external. And we're going to have concepts like work tells, where places that people come to gather for 2, 3 days in a hotel-y kind of environment, but that's when they have their XBR, whether
Mhm.
it's weekly, monthly, quarterly.